I never thought I'd be starting over at 50, but life doesn't wait for permission to change everything. 2 years ago, I lost my husband, Mark. One day he was here laughing over breakfast, planning our weekend, and the next he was gone. A sudden illness, they said. Sudden. As if that made it easier to bear. When the dust settled, my children, Jake and Mia, did everything they could to keep me standing. But life goes on, doesn't it? Jake's 28 now, climbing the corporate ladder in the city, and Mia's 25, chasing her dreams and her boyfriend across the country. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt irrelevant. They had their lives, and I didn't want to be the mother who clung to their coattails, asking for scraps of attention. So I made a decision. I packed up our family home, a place filled with more memories than I could carry, and moved here, a quiet neighborhood far from the chaos of the city. My new house? Modest. A cozy little place with creaky floors and windows that catch just enough sunlight to remind me the world is still turning. Cheaper too, which doesn't hurt when you're living off a teacher's pension. At first glance, this place seemed perfect. The streets are lined with beautiful trees, and the only noise you'll hear is the occasional bark of a dog or the laughter of children playing a street over. It's peaceful, yes, but it's lonely. The first time I noticed my neighbor, Edward Hartley, I was unpacking boxes in my new home. It was a warm afternoon, and I stepped outside to take a break. That's when I saw him. He was sitting on the porch of the house across the street, a book resting on his lap. At first, I thought he was just keeping to himself, enjoying the peace of the afternoon. But as the days passed, I began to notice something peculiar. I caught him glancing my way more than once, and each time, he quickly returned to his book or pretended to be watching something else. It wasn't unsettling, but it stayed with me. I'd never had someone look at me like that before, like they were searching for something, maybe something they thought they'd lost. The first time I spoke to Edward, I had been out front, pruning the scraggly hedge along the driveway. It wasn't much of a garden, but I was trying to make it feel a little less neglected. That's when I saw him, Edward, walking slowly down his front steps, heading to his mailbox. He was dressed neatly in a button-up shirt and slacks and moved with a calmness that caught my attention. I straightened up and smiled as he reached the mailbox. He returned the smile, a warm, polite expression that instantly made me feel at ease. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and smooth. "You must be new around here." I nodded and introduced myself, mentioning how I had just moved in. Edward introduced himself too, simply saying, "I'm Edward Hartley, your neighbor from across the street." His words were friendly. We exchanged small pleasantries about the neighborhood, the weather, and how peaceful the area was. It was a short conversation, but his deep, steady voice stayed with me for the rest of the day. After that first meeting, our paths began crossing more often. Sometimes it was during my evening walks when Edward would be outside watering the plants on his porch. Other times, he'd wave from across the fence as I carried groceries or tidied up the driveway. These small moments turned into brief chats. Edward was easy to talk to, and I started to look forward to our little exchanges. Over time, our conversations grew longer. He began sharing bits of his life. Edward was the kind of man who seemed like he had his whole life in order. He told me he was a retired architect, and when he described his work, it was easy to imagine him in his younger years, meticulous, focused, and calm under pressure. But beneath all that calm and control, I could sense something else. There was a sadness in the way he talked about the past, especially when he mentioned Isabel, his wife of 40 years. "She passed away 10 years ago," he said, his voice soft but steady. "We were married for 40 years. She was everything to me." His eyes drifted as if searching for her in the distance. "It hasn't been the same without her." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, letting him speak. He went on to describe Isabel, how she loved to read, how she could brighten a room with her laughter. I could tell that talking about her brought both joy and pain, like reopening an old wound that had never quite healed. Then, one day, he said something that caught me completely off guard. We were standing near the fence again, chatting about nothing in particular, when he paused, looking at me for a long moment. "You remind me of her," he said quietly. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated as if trying to find the right words. "You look just like Isabel. The way you move, the way you smile, it's uncanny." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt unsettled by the comparison, but another part of me was intrigued. Was that why he had been so warm and attentive since the day we met? I wasn't sure what to make of it, but something about his honesty made me want to know more about him, to understand the life he had lived and the pain he still carried. Looking back, that was the moment our connection began to shift from polite neighbors to something deeper, though I didn't realize it at the time. At first, I thought he was drawn to me because I reminded him of Isabel. He didn't hide it. He told me I had the same way of tilting my head when I was deep in thought, and that my voice carried the same calmness Isabel had. It felt strange to be compared to someone I'd never met, but I could tell it came from a place of love and longing. It felt good to be seen, not as someone broken, but as someone who was still learning how to put the pieces back together. And with Edward, I didn't feel the need to hide the cracks. It was a quiet evening. Edward sat across from me on my small porch, holding a cup of tea I had just poured for him. We didn't speak much at first, letting the soft chirping of crickets fill the silence. Edward always seemed comfortable in these quiet moments, but this time, something about him felt different, like he was carrying a heavy weight he wanted to set down. He took a sip of his tea and placed the cup gently on the table, his eyes fixed on the wooden grain. When he looked up, his gaze was intense, almost vulnerable, as if he were searching for the right words. "Eve," he started, his voice quieter than usual. "I need to say this." He paused, running a hand through his silver hair, clearly unsure how to continue. "You've done something for me that I didn't think was possible." I tilted my head slightly, curious, but unsure of where he was going. "What do you mean?" He looked straight at me then, his expression softening but still serious. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he said. "Not after Isabel. Losing her, it left a hole in me, a space I thought would always stay empty." Hearing him say her name made my chest tighten. I knew he loved his late wife deeply, and I could see the pain in his eyes every time he mentioned her. But there was something different about the way he spoke now. "But you," he continued, "you've brought a light back into my world. You've made me realize there's still something left to feel, something left to give." Edward wasn't just thanking me for being a kind neighbor or a friend. He was saying something much bigger, something that made my heart race. "I don't just want us to be neighbors, Eve," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want more. I need more. I want you to fill the space in my life that's been empty for so long." For a moment, I couldn't speak. His words were so honest and raw that they left me frozen in place. I felt a rush of emotions, gratitude, fear, and something else I hadn't felt in years. Hope. But then doubt crept in. Mark. My late husband's name echoed in my mind, and guilt followed close behind. Mark had been my everything, the person who had stood by me through life's highs and lows. Could I open my heart to someone else without feeling like I was betraying him? Would loving Edward erase the love I still carried for Mark? At the same time, I couldn't ignore what Edward had become to me. Over the weeks and months, he had filled the empty corners of my days with warmth and care. His laughter, his stories, even the way he simply sat beside me. It had chipped away at the loneliness I'd been living with for so long. As I sat there, looking into Edward's eyes, I realized something. Edward wasn't asking me to leave my past behind. He was asking me to make room for a future. I still didn't know what I would say, but for the first time in a long time, the idea of letting someone in didn't feel so impossible. A few days after Edward's confession, I found myself standing in my kitchen, staring at the ingredients I'd carefully set out on the counter. The decision to invite him for dinner had taken days of deliberation, a tug-of-war between doubt and hope. But here I was, chopping vegetables and seasoning chicken, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in my chest. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the oven and the rhythmic chop of my knife against the cutting board. I had lit a few candles on the dining table, not too many to make it formal, just enough to make it cozy. The table was set for two, a simple yet deliberate gesture. When the knock finally came, I paused to steady my breath before opening the door. Edward stood there, holding a bottle of wine, his kind eyes crinkling slightly as he smiled. I wasn't sure what pairs with chicken, so I brought my favorite, he said with a small laugh, holding up the bottle. It'll be perfect, I replied, stepping aside to let him in. Dinner was simple but comforting. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and a fresh garden salad. We ate slowly, talking about small things. There were moments of silence, but they felt natural, as though words weren't always necessary. After we finished eating, we moved to the living room. I brought out 2 cups of tea, and we settled into the couch. The room was dimly lit, the flicker of candlelight dancing on the walls. It felt intimate, but not overwhelming. Edward broke the silence first. I wasn't sure you'd invite me over, he said, his voice soft but steady. I thought maybe I'd scared you off. I shook my head, smiling faintly. You didn't scare me. You made me think. And to be honest, I wasn't sure either. But I wanted to see where this could go. He nodded, his gaze meeting mine. You've brought something back into my life I thought was gone for good, he said. I've spent so many years just existing. And then you came along. And it was like remembering how to feel again. His words hung in the air. You're right, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I didn't think I'd feel this way again either. But I do. It was the first time I'd spoken the words out loud, admitting to myself as much as to him that this was something real, something worth exploring. He reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. You don't have to be sure of everything, he said. We can take this one day at a time. When he leaned in, I met him halfway. The kiss was soft and hesitant at first, but it deepened. That night was different. It wasn't planned, nor did it feel like the dramatic scenes you see in movies. It was quiet, almost delicate, like a flower opening for the first time in spring. We moved to the bedroom and continued kissing. His kiss was soft, not demanding, just enough to show me what he felt. I didn't expect to feel so much in return as his hands traveled around my body. But there it was, a quiet spark I thought had burned out forever. It wasn't the kind of passion that swept you off your feet. It was more like standing in front of a warm fire on a cold night, the heat spreading slowly until it reached every part of me. Later, as we lay together in my bed, I realized just how long it had been since I'd shared this kind of closeness. His arm wrapped around me felt both unfamiliar and familiar at the same time. The rise and fall of his chest against my back was steady, like a rhythm I didn't know I had missed. It wasn't just the physical warmth that comforted me. It was the silence between us, filled with understanding. Neither of us needed to say anything. We were just 2 people who had spent years living with loss, now finding a way to feel alive again. As I drifted off to sleep, his hand resting lightly on mine, I realized something important. This wasn't about replacing what I had lost. Mark, my late husband, will always have a place in my heart. But in that moment, I understood that love doesn't have to look the same every time. It doesn't erase what came before, it simply adds to it. And as I felt Edward's breath slow beside me, I knew I was finally allowing myself to begin again. The days that followed were beautiful. Edward and I started seeing each other more often. He would knock on my door some mornings with 2 cups of coffee, one for him and one for me. I thought he might like it, he'd say, handing it to me with that warm smile of his. And of course, I did. It became our little ritual, sitting on my porch, sipping coffee, and talking about anything, our lives, the past, or even the little things we noticed about the neighborhood. At some point, I started cooking extra portions for dinner without even thinking about it, knowing I'd bring him a plate. He always joked that I was spoiling him, but I could tell he appreciated the gesture. And he wasn't the only one giving. Edward started helping me with things around the house. My mailbox had been loose for weeks, and one day, I saw him outside fixing it without saying a word. When I thanked him, he just waved me off, saying, "Can't have you tripping over it now. Can we?" It wasn't just the big gestures, though. It was the small things, him carrying my groceries when I came back from the store, or me walking over to water the flowers he had planted outside his porch when he forgot. These little moments stitched themselves into our days, so much so that I couldn't quite remember what my life had been like before him. One of my favorite routines was our evening walks. Each evening, we'd walk together, sometimes in comfortable silence, other times chatting about everything and nothing. It was strange how natural it felt, as if Edward had always been there. And in some ways, it felt like he brought a new kind of energy into my life, something I didn't realize I'd been missing. He wasn't just filling the empty spaces. He was helping me see the beauty in them. And for the first time in a long time, my days felt lighter and brighter, like I wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone anymore.